My name is Richard Branson. I work in a small factory as a laborer. I have no special qualifications and started working right after finishing high school. I can't afford to quit my job, even though the pay is very low. Because of this, I have just a single $300 bill in my wallet, and there's only about $800 in my bank account. I figured I could manage somehow. One day, I saw a girl who looked very rough. She was wearing a high school uniform, but it wasn't from any local school. It was cold, and she wasn't wearing a coat. Her knees were scraped and her clothes were a mess. I wondered what was wrong with her. Wasn't she going home? She was sitting there at that time. Maybe she had a stomachache or something. She kept rubbing her legs together and blowing on her hands to warm them up. I thought if I left her alone, she might get into trouble. So I decided to help. I went to a nearby coffee shop and bought some hot drinks and donuts. When I walked over to her, she looked scared and tensed up. "Hey, good evening. Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you," I said. "You looked cold, so I got you something warm. Would you like this?" I handed her a hot lemon tea. She took it and pressed it against her cheek to warm up. "Aren't you hungry? Being hungry makes you feel even colder. Here, would you like to eat this?" I didn't know what kind of donuts teenage girls liked, so I just picked one. She took it and said, "Thank you," in a small voice. "Aren't you going home?" I asked. She shook her head but didn't say anything. I wondered if she had run away from home, but I didn't want to get too involved. I wasn't sure what to do next, but then the wind blew her skirt, and I saw that her legs were covered in painful-looking wounds. "What happened to your legs?" I asked. She quickly pulled her skirt down to cover them, but I had already seen the injuries. "Did someone hurt you? Were you beaten?" She stiffened and didn't seem like she wanted to talk. "Okay, I'm sorry. There are things you don't want to talk about, right? That's fine. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. But if you stay here, you might get into trouble. How about going home?" She said in a small voice. "No, I was thinking of going to my dad's place, but it's far away." Her dad's place. That meant she was living with her mom now. I didn't know what was going on, but it seemed complicated. "Why don't you call your dad? Maybe he can come pick you up." I don't know his phone number. I don't even have a cell phone. I was surprised that a teenager these days didn't have a phone. "Do you know his address? Do you know where he lives?" She nodded and showed me a small piece of paper with an address I didn't recognize. "Is this where you can meet him?" She nodded again. "It does seem far, and it's already late." I took out my smartphone and searched for the address. It came up as Greenwood Group UK, a construction company. I wrote down the phone number I found and gave it to her. "Here's a number I found for that address. You should call it tomorrow. You'll probably find out about your dad. It's Greenwood Group UK, so maybe your dad works for a construction company. I hope you can see him." The girl smiled brightly. "All right, you should stay at a nearby hotel tonight. I'll make a reservation for you. You can stay alone, right?" I don't have any money. I didn't have much money either, but I had a $300 bill in my wallet. Maybe it would be enough for one night. "Don't worry, I can cover one night for you. After a warm bath and a good night's sleep in a bed, you should call your dad. But I can't pay you back. Don't worry about it. Just focus on meeting your dad." I booked a room at a nearby hotel that included breakfast for $300. I took the girl there, spoke to the staff, and handed over the money. I also asked them to let her make a phone call in the morning. After that, I left. I felt good about helping her, even though my wallet was empty. A few days later, my factory manager, Mr. John, called me in. "Did you call for me?" I asked, surprised, since it was my first time being called to his office. I went in with a nervous look. Mr. John was wearing an expensive suit, which seemed odd for a small factory manager. "It's Richard, right?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Richard Branson," I replied. "You don't need to come here anymore," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "It means you're fired," he said bluntly. I was shocked and didn't know what to say. "So, pack your things and leave," he added. "Excuse me, can you tell me why? Did I do something wrong?" I asked, still not understanding. "We don't need troublemakers like you in our company," he said. "I don't understand. What makes me a troublemaker?" I asked. "You have connections with the mafia, don't you?" he accused. "No, that's not true," I protested. "I can't believe this. I've never been involved with the mafia. Say what you want, but the mafia is looking into you. We can't have someone like that working here. We never wanted to hire someone with just a high school diploma in the first place. The old boss used to say things like, if someone is motivated, that's enough. Please, I have nothing to do with the mafia. If I lose this job, how will I survive? I pleaded. I don't care if you end up on the street. That's not my problem. Maybe you should ask the mafia for help, he said coldly. I really have nothing to do with the mafia. There must be a mistake. Please, don't fire me, I begged. No, the decision is final. We don't need people like you in our small factory. Next time you apply for a job, don't lie about stuff like this, he said, ending the conversation. I'm not lying. I've never been involved with such people. Were you hanging out with bad kids in high school? Are those the kind of people looking for you? Mr. John asked. No, that's not possible. Please, Mr. John, I'm telling you the truth. Enough. Just leave. I've told the office to pay you for today. Don't ever come back to our company again. I kept saying there must be some mistake, but he wouldn't listen at all. He looked at me like I was trash, then pointed at the door and said, Is that all you've got to say? I've heard your side of the story, and that's enough. Now get out. I've got work to do. It was over. Realizing this was the end, I went to the office and received a thin envelope. It was my last paycheck from the company. Was the 13 years I worked so hard for really worth just this thin envelope? When I said goodbye to my colleagues, they were shocked and said things like, Why so suddenly? That's ridiculous, expressing their regret over my departure. But no matter how much my colleagues regretted it, there was no changing the manager's mind, and no one was willing to stand up for me. They knew that if they did, they might be the next to be fired. Leaving my colleagues with a take care, I walked out of the company gates I had been going through for 13 years. What am I supposed to do now, being fired so suddenly? All I have is this thin envelope. I just hope I can find another job before the money runs out. Thinking these thoughts, I was looking at the ground beneath my feet when I noticed a black car stopping nearby. Why would a car stop here? Curious, I looked up and saw a black luxury car. It's in the way, I thought. Must be some big shot here for the factory. He should hurry up and get inside. The driver, wearing gloves, got out and opened the rear door. A man in an expensive suit and a girl stepped out. The man asked the girl, Is this the guy? She nodded. Seeing her nod, I exclaimed, Oh, you're the girl from that time. So, you did meet your dad, right? That's great. I'm really glad you were able to meet him safely, forgetting my own troubles for a moment. I talked to her, and she smiled brightly and hugged me. Thanks to you, my daughter was able to come to me safely. Thank you so much, said her dad. You're her dad. That's great. I was worried about her but didn't know how to contact you. I replied, By the way, are you leaving the company so early? Do you have somewhere to be? Oh yeah, something like that, I said with a forced laugh. I couldn't tell someone I just met, especially someone who looked like a company president, that I had just been fired. He seemed important, riding in such a fancy car and dressed so well. I felt like I shouldn't even be talking to him. If you're not in a hurry, I'd like to thank you. It's almost lunchtime. How about a meal? He asked. No, thank you. That's too much. I couldn't possibly accept your gratitude for something that was just the right thing to do, I replied. Come on, don't be like that. Of course, if you have other plans, I won't insist. But if you're free, could you join me? I wouldn't feel right letting you go without properly thanking you. After all, you helped my daughter, and a simple thanks just doesn't seem enough, he said. I initially refused because I had nowhere to be. I had just been fired, and in my sad state, looking for another job wasn't going to go well. So I thought, if he insists, I'll accept his offer. If you insist, then I'll join you, I said, and decided to go along. I got into the car and we went to a high-end restaurant. Excuse me, I'm dressed like this, I said, looking at my work clothes. I had expected a diner at most, so I was surprised. But the man laughed and said, Don't worry about it. Clothes don't eat the meal, and pushed me forward. He must have been a regular because the hostess didn't make a fuss and even smiled at me. The atmosphere in the private room was luxurious and extraordinary. I thought to myself, wow, this place is very fancy. It feels a bit uncomfortable for someone like me with just a high school diploma. But as the drinks started flowing, things began to feel different. Seeing the girl's smile and the warm conversation between her and her father was enough to warm my heart. Not to mention, the fine drinks and luxurious food made me feel like this might be the first and last feast of my life. I was enjoying every bite of my meal. After a while, the man revealed his identity. I should have introduced myself at the beginning, but that's just how I am, he said, handing me a business card. It read, Beat of Greenwood Family UK. Oh my God, Mafia, I exclaimed. Yes, you're right, he replied calmly, but a Mafia member is also a parent. Thanks to you, I could reunite with my daughter, and I'm very grateful. Oh, it was my pleasure, I said. By the way, I've been wondering, why was she there that day? That's because her mother and I divorced years ago, he explained. She remarried soon after. Her new husband became the vice president of a small factory, but after her mother passed away, his new wife moved in. The president of the factory, who had been kind to my daughter, also passed away. After that, the vice president took over as president, and my daughter was treated poorly. Is that why her legs were bruised? I asked. Yes, he said sadly. She was hurt in places that wouldn't show, especially on her back. It was terrible. Her mother had given her an amulet before she died and told her to use it if she ever needed help. That amulet had a note with my address. Not having a phone number on it was a bit of an oversight, I commented. She was trying desperately to find me, he continued. Even though she's in high school, it was a long distance to walk. By the time you found her, her wallet was empty. If she had stayed out there, she might have frozen to death. It was a tough situation. Her mother's new husband put her through so much pain, and I swore to get revenge for what he did to her. It doesn't sound good for a Mafia member to say that, but I understand how you feel, I said. Thank you. What about you? Leaving work at this hour, something must have happened, right? He asked. It's a bit odd to tell this to someone I just met, especially a boss, but I was actually fired just now, I said. Fired? Why? He asked, surprised. I was wrongfully accused of having connections with antisocial forces. I have no idea how that happened. Just this morning, out of the blue, I was told about it and then fired. Wait a minute, he said. He called over an executive who was standing by. After a brief whispered exchange, she exclaimed, Idiots, and turned to me. I'm really sorry, that was my guy's fault, he said. What do you mean? I asked, confused. I wanted to thank you so much that I had my men check up on you. They found out where you worked but wanted to make sure you were really there. It seems like they mentioned our organization's name over the phone. That's probably what got back to your boss and led to you being fired. I'm really sorry about that. Let me fix this. I'll talk to your manager tomorrow, explain the misunderstanding, and everything should be okay. No, it's all right, I replied. It's not all right. You must be in trouble, right? He insisted. Yes, it's true that I'm in a tough spot, I admitted, but going back to work under a manager who doesn't trust me would be the same old problem. I don't want to work for someone like that. I see. So, do you have another job lined up? He asked. No. Embarrassingly, I have nothing. Honestly, if I don't find something by the end of the month, I'm in big trouble. But I still want to stand firm and find a job on my own, I explained. Good for you. In that case, how about I introduce you to a company run by a friend of mine? They're not involved with the mafia or anything. I think my friend would like you, he offered. No, that's okay, I said, even though I really wanted to accept his offer. I was tempted, but could I trust it, knowing he was involved with the mafia? Well, if you ever need help, call the number on my card. I'm always here for you, he said with a smile. About a month later, I ended up needing his help. No matter how many interviews I went to, I couldn't find a job. I was starting to think I'd have to settle for part-time work. Then one day, he called me. I'm in the mood for a drink, but I've got no one to drink with. Would you mind keeping me company? Don't worry about the money, I'm inviting you. He made it sound like I wouldn't be a burden, even though he was a mafia boss. I was surprised to see such a kind side of him and decided to accept his invitation. If it's a bar, you really don't want much, right? He asked. That's not true. I'm just picking a bar because I'm more comfortable there than in a fancy restaurant. I've never been to a fancy restaurant. It makes me feel nervous. Honestly, I replied. I feel more comfortable in a casual bar. I see. I guess I wasn't being very thoughtful, he said. No, not at all, I replied, holding up my beer mug. I'll take this, thank you, and I gulped down the beer. So, did you find a job? He asked. Actually, not yet. Being just a high school graduate, it's been really hard. I've applied to a lot of companies, but no luck, I explained. That's tough, he said. I was thinking, would you mind helping me with something for a moment? My heart skipped a beat. Being asked by the mafia to help out didn't sound good. I couldn't help but think it was something bad. But he continued talking in a way that made me feel less worried. Even though I'm with the mafia, it doesn't mean we only do bad things. I just want to get justice for the man who hurt my daughter. Justice? I asked. Yes, over the past month, I've been looking into who did those terrible things to my daughter. It turns out it was the manager of the company you worked for. He acts as the manager, but the previous manager used to wear work clothes and help out on the factory floor. This guy wears expensive suits and never shows up at the factory. He lives in a luxury neighborhood over an hour away by car. That's why he's always late. Exactly, he's the typical executive who doesn't care about the workers. My daughter was like his maid, and it seems she wasn't even fed properly. She was crying while eating just a single bagel. Really? That's terrible, I said, shocked. Yes, it's true. I can't believe he treated my daughter like that, he said angrily, finishing his beer. That's why I need your help. I want to get revenge for my daughter, but I'm not planning anything illegal. I don't want to end up in jail and miss out on time with my daughter because of a guy like him. So, we're going to do it legally. Legally? I asked, curious. Yes, that's why I set up a company. What kind of company? I asked. It's in the same industry, but it doesn't really matter. What I really want to do is take over his company. Take over? Yes, we'll take it over and get rid of the manager. I've got all the evidence against him, he said confidently. He's got a lot of personal debt, mostly from gambling and similar stuff. Now he's using the company's money to pay off his debts. Is he really? I asked, surprised. Yes, that's why the employees' wages are so low. They dropped a lot after the previous manager passed away. That's true. Our salaries did drop sharply after he died, I confirmed. That's the scheme. You all were working to cover his debts. I want to kick him out of the company and make it a place where the employees can earn what they deserve, he explained. What will happen to him if he's kicked out? I asked. Well, he'll probably end up in deep trouble. Plus, his wife only married him for his money. If she finds out he's no longer the president, she'll likely leave him, and I'll make sure no company will hire him, he said confidently. You can do that? I asked, amazed. Hey, I'm the boss of Greenwood. I can handle things like that easily, he replied. I asked for your help because you were also a victim of his actions. I thought maybe you'd want revenge too. Yes, I think all the employees would feel the same way once they know about this, I said. They probably would. If this goes well, I plan to expand that factory even more. I want to make you the manager, he said. Me? A manager? But I'm just a high school graduate. That's impossible, I said, feeling doubtful. What are you talking about? In the past, it wasn't uncommon for high school graduates to become presidents. If you lack education, you make up for it with experience and hard work. I believe you can do it, he encouraged me. If you become the manager, I can trust the factory will be in good hands. The first task will be taking over that factory. Are you in? I understand. Count me in, I agreed. Good, then tonight we'll drink to the future of the new company, he said. And that's how I found myself unexpectedly involved in the plan to take over the factory that had fired me. 2 months later, we had thoroughly investigated the factory and the manager from all angles. We decided to cause significant financial damage to the factory through our takeover plan. Long time no see, Mr. John, I said when we met again. Oh, have we met before? He asked, looking puzzled. You wouldn't remember a high school graduate employee. It's Richard Branson, I said, revealing my identity. I was fired under the false accusation of having connections with the mafia. No, that was just Greenwood calling to check if you were an employee. You used that as a reason to fire me, a high school graduate, I said. Well, that's not exactly how it was, he stammered. It's okay. Thanks to that, I found a good job at my current company. I have no hard feelings. In fact, I've come to you with a good offer, I continued. A good offer? You mean you want to make a deal with us? He asked, curious. Yes. Your products are of very high quality, something I know from working here for years. That's why I want to offer you a $8 million contract, I explained. $8 million, he echoed, surprised. Yes, I'd like you to deliver that amount of goods within 3 weeks. Once the delivery is confirmed, we'll transfer the $8 million to you, I said. That would be great. So will you accept the contract? He asked eagerly. Of course, I said, placing the contract on the table and asking him to sign it. Without reading the details, he was overjoyed by the mention of $8 million and signed it. Knowing his poor administrative skills, I expected this outcome, but it was still amusing to see a company manager behave this way. Once the contract was signed, he pushed his employees hard, making them work without rest. The goods were produced, but when it came time for delivery, a problem arose. No delivery company would accept the job. That was because Greenwood had put a stop to it. Desperate, John himself went looking for any carrier. That's when a truck driven by a member of Greenwood arrived. The goods were loaded onto dozens of trucks, but along the way, they all stopped for various reasons, like vehicle malfunctions. Eventually, the goods didn't arrive by the deadline. I immediately contacted John and went back to the factory. The goods didn't arrive by the deadline. Now our company has suffered a huge loss. This is a breach of contract, I told him. No, we shipped everything properly, he protested. It's clearly stated in the contract, isn't it? If the goods don't arrive, you'll pay $8 million, I pointed out. That's ridiculous, he exclaimed, realizing the mess he was in. I don't know anything about such a clause, Mr. John stammered, looking at me with wide eyes. Whether you know about it or not, it's clearly written here in the contract, I replied, pointing to the specific section. Claiming that you didn't read it won't help you now. This can't be happening. My company doesn't have $8 million, he exclaimed, panic rising in his voice. Well, then we have no choice but to take over this factory, I said calmly. Take over the factory. That's also in the contract, he asked, his voice trembling. Yes, even if the delivery failure was caused by the carrier, your company bears all the responsibility. You signed the contract, didn't you? I reminded him, holding up the document. Wait, I didn't understand what I was signing. Losing this factory will ruin everything, he pleaded, starting to realize the gravity of the situation. It seems so, I said, unmoved by his desperation, and without the factory, no one will cover your personal debts anymore. How did you know about my debts? He asked, shock and fear in his eyes. We did our homework. That's not all. Your wife will probably leave you too. It seems she married you for your money, I continued, laying out the harsh reality. So, you knew all this and still tricked me into signing this contract, he said, his face turning pale as he grasped the full extent of his predicament. It's not just me who has a grudge against you. That's why this happened. Now the factory belongs to our company. Pack your things and leave, I instructed firmly. This is unbelievable. What am I going to do with all this debt? He cried, slumping into his chair, his face buried in his hands. After being kicked out of the factory, John went home to his wife, hoping she could help with the debt. He explained the situation, pleading for her support, but his wife, who had enjoyed a life of luxury thanks to his position, was not willing to stick around now that he was broke. She slammed the divorce papers down in front of him and demanded compensation for all the money she claimed to have spent during their marriage. Without the factory, we're finished. I need your help to pay off this debt, John begged. You should have thought about that before you lost everything, she replied coldly. I married you for your money, and now that you're penniless, there's no reason for me to stay. But we've been together for so long. Can't you help me through this? He pleaded, tears in his eyes. No, I've had enough. You're on your own, she said, showing no sympathy. She handed him the divorce papers, demanding a large sum in compensation. This added to his already massive debt, burying him under an insurmountable financial burden. John, now alone and overwhelmed with debt, found himself in a dire situation. With nowhere to turn, he realized that the life he had built was crumbling around him. The weight of his debts and the loss of his wife left him in a deep pit of despair, facing a future filled with uncertainty and hardship. As the reality of this situation set in, John could only think about how he had gotten to this point. The false accusations, the rushed decisions, and the betrayal by those he trusted had led him to this moment of utter ruin. The once proud manager, who had enjoyed a life of comfort and power, now faced a grim and uncertain future, with nothing left but the crushing weight of his mistakes. When I reported everything to the boss, he was very pleased and praised me. Now, that guy won't be able to get a job anywhere ever again. He'll learn what it really means to betray people. Yes, I hope he realizes the consequences of his actions and understands what it's like to treat people so poorly, I replied, feeling a sense of justice. Right now, you're the manager of that factory, the boss continued. You have the opportunity to grow the company, not just for yourself, but for the employees as well, right? No, I didn't do this for myself, I said, shaking my head. I did it for my daughter, for you, and for the employees who have been working hard at the factory. They deserve to be treated with respect and to have a good working environment. I want to make sure they are happy and feel valued. Good. Make sure those employees are happy and taken care of, he said with a nod. Yes, sir, I understand, I replied. With that, I went back to the factory, now as its new manager. My former colleagues were surprised and happy to see me return. Thank you all for staying and continuing to work hard, I said. I know it hasn't been easy, but together, we can make this factory grow and ensure that everyone gets the salary and recognition they deserve. This factory belongs to all of us, and we will make it a place we can be proud of. As I spoke, I could see the relief and excitement in their faces. They were cheering and welcoming me back warmly, and I felt a deep sense of responsibility and commitment to them. I had been away from the factory for a while, and things had changed. The atmosphere was different, but I was determined to bring positive changes. I started by meeting with each department, talking to the workers, and understanding their concerns. They told me about the problems they had faced under the previous manager, who had treated them poorly and neglected their needs. We were struggling with low wages and unfair treatment, one of the workers told me. It felt like no one cared about us. I'm here now, and I care, I reassured them. We're going to make things better. Your hard work will be recognized, and you'll get the pay you deserve. Let's work together to turn this factory around. I spent the next few weeks working closely with the employees, making sure their voices were heard and their needs were met. We implemented new policies to improve working conditions and raised wages to ensure that everyone was paid fairly for their work. We also focused on improving the quality of our products and expanding our market. One day, I gathered everyone for a meeting. I want to thank all of you for your dedication and hard work, I said. We've made great progress, and the factory is already seeing the benefits. Our production has increased, and our sales are up. This wouldn't have been possible without each and every one of you. The employees cheered and clapped, feeling appreciated and motivated. They were proud of the work they had done and excited about the future of the factory. As the months went by, the factory continued to grow and prosper. We expanded our operations, hired more workers, and increased our production. The employees were happier and more engaged, and the factory became a place where people wanted to work. During one of our company meetings, I addressed the entire staff. I'm so proud of what we've accomplished together. We've turned this factory around and made it a thriving business. But we're not done yet. There's still so much more we can achieve. Let's continue to work hard, support each other, and make this factory the best it can be. The response was overwhelming. The employees were enthusiastic and committed to the future of the factory. They knew that they were part of something special and that their efforts were making a difference. Over time, the factory became known for its high-quality products and excellent working conditions. We built strong relationships with our customers and suppliers, and our reputation grew. We became a model for other companies, showing that treating employees well and focusing on quality can lead to success. Looking back, I was grateful for the opportunity to make a difference. I had come to the factory under difficult circumstances, but with hard work and determination, we had created something amazing. The factory was no longer just a place of work. It was a community, a family, and a source of pride for everyone involved. And through it all, I never forgot why I had taken on this challenge. It was for my daughter, for the employees, and for the future of the factory. Together, we had turned a struggling business into a thriving success, and I couldn't have been prouder of what we had achieved.
On that important day, I stood in front of my father's grave. My father had been the CEO of a major company, and after his death, my brother-in-law Kyle took over. He inherited the company and a huge fortune. In contrast, all I got was an old mini truck. Kyle, flaunting his good fortune, mockingly said, "With this, I've got the company and the entire estate in my grasp. That mini truck suits you." But to me, that mini truck was more than just a vehicle. I looked at it fondly, and when I started the engine, I noticed a destination already set on the navigation system. "What's this?" I wondered. With a firm yet gentle grip, I began to drive. My name is Jack Nicholson. I am a 44-year-old tutor. Now, I am standing before a large coffin where my father rests peacefully. My relationship with my father had always been very complicated. He built a construction company from scratch, but I chose a different path. I left home to become a teacher right after university, fulfilling a childhood dream. This decision led to many heated arguments, and for a long time, we barely spoke. But despite our disagreements, I never hated my father. I had my own dreams to follow, and I couldn't give them up to run the family business. Even though I felt a strong duty as the eldest son, guilt weighed on me for not meeting my father's expectations. This guilt kept me from visiting my parents' home. My mother relied on my sister, Lauren, to update my father about my life. Lauren and her husband would often send expensive gifts or arrange trips for my father's birthday or their anniversary, pretending they were from me. Each time, Lauren would encourage me, saying, "I wish you and Dad could talk directly. He's just trying to be strong." Deep down, he must be feeling lonely. I often thought about Lauren's words and would just shake my head. But one day, I got the sad news that my father had cancer. When I heard this, I quickly quit my job and went back to where my family lived. I realized that what really mattered was life itself, and the past arguments with my father seemed so small. I decided to move back to my hometown, teach at a local school, and take care of my sick father. At first, my father was shocked to see me return, but he eventually accepted it quietly. I didn't say much either. I just stayed by his side and took care of him, helping him whenever he needed it. He would thank me softly, and those words brought me some peace. Sadly, my father's fight with his illness ended. The last chapter of his life closed quietly with me, Lauren, and our mother by his side. We couldn't know what he was thinking in his last moments, but we hoped his soul was at peace. Even though we expected it, losing him deeply affected us all. My mother, Lauren, and even my young nephew, Peter, were all very sad and cried. The only one who didn't show any emotion was my brother-in-law, Kyle. During the funeral preparations, he coldly asked, "Did he finally die, huh?" Hearing that, I was proud of myself for staying calm and not reacting angrily to Kyle. Instead, I focused on planning my father's funeral. This kept me busy and helped distract me from the pain. I ignored Kyle's harsh words and made sure everything for the funeral was done right. Kyle and I had never gotten along well, and our relationship only got worse over time. But despite everything, I kept my focus during this tough time. I first met Kyle when he was a skilled worker at my father's company, and I really respected his skills. It felt like I had gained a real brother when Kyle married my sister, Lauren. He was 5 years older than me and seemed like a role model. Before they got married, I often asked him for advice on various problems, and he always listened with understanding. one of our big discussions was about whether I should join the family business. Kyle would say, Sean should live his own life, and Jack, you have your own path. No one knows which choices in life are the best, so the most important thing is to make choices you won't regret later. Encouraged by his words, I switched from business school, where I was studying management, to the Faculty of Education, where I really wanted to study. As time went on, Kyle and Lauren got married and started their life together. 22 years have passed since then, and the distance between my father and me grew wider. I moved on with my life, missing the chance to close that gap. But when I heard about my father's illness, I dropped everything and rushed home. Kyle, who once greeted me warmly, had changed. He now seemed uncomfortable around me. When we were alone, Kyle would say coldly, "You came back in a hurry when you heard Sean was sick, didn't you? But no matter what, you won't inherit anything." His words caught me off guard, and I struggled to respond. "What do you mean? Don't act like you don't know. It might be a coincidence, but even if you now want to run the company, it's already decided that I will be the next leader?" His harsh words shocked me, and I replied louder than I intended, "No, that's not it. I didn't come back for the company. I realized I hadn't been a good son and wanted to apologize to Dad, even if it's late." Kyle dismissed me. "I don't need your fancy talk. It sounds like something from a TV drama. Lauren likes that kind of stuff. But were all those gifts you sent just a way to look good in front of Sean?" "That's absolutely not true." I tried to explain, but Kyle had already made up his mind and wasn't interested in believing me. His words also seemed like a slight against Lauren, and for the first time, I felt a deep divide between us. Ever since that incident, I started to feel really upset with Kyle. He began to mock me openly. "No matter how much you try to win Sean over, that time has passed. Don't make me laugh. Go back to where you belong and take care of your troubled students," he would say. At first, I thought deeply about how I appeared to others and how they saw me. But Kyle's words showed he was more concerned about himself than our father. His behavior often seemed disrespectful to both his father-in-law and his wife, Lauren. I started to believe that Kyle had married Lauren mainly to get closer to my father's company and wealth. He rarely visited my father when he was sick and didn't help take care of him. Now, all I could do was work as hard as possible to protect the company my father, Sean, had built. Kyle always sounded polished, but he really just wanted to avoid problems. On weekends, he would go play golf, claiming it was for business. He hardly ever took care of his own son. He said he wanted his son to learn many skills to eventually take over the business, but he left all the driving and housework to Lauren. When Lauren showed a bit of unhappiness about this, Kyle would passionately take her hand and say, "I'm giving my all for Sean's sake. Now is the time to produce results by any means necessary. Let's overcome this trial together." Lauren found it hard to stand up to him and usually just nodded, even though she seemed reluctant. Kyle was good at acting like the perfect husband in front of Lauren, so it's no surprise she believed him. He showed his true self to me, probably because he thought I was like him. I eventually got used to Kyle's mocking, and it didn't bother me as much. However, when our beloved father passed away, I was heartbroken. I felt a deep sadness and emptiness. Although Kyle seemed upset about our father's worsening health, I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been waiting for this moment. This thought made me very sad and angry. After our father died, Kyle inherited most of our father's large fortune. Even though he was just a son-in-law, he had the same rights to the inheritance as Lauren and me, according to my father's will. He got most of the shares of the company and a lot of wealth. This unexpected turn of events left me speechless, even though I was my father's biological child. I had thought the inheritance would be split fairly among the three of us, but instead, Kyle got almost everything. All I received was an old mini truck that my father once loved. In public, Kyle seemed surprised, but alone with me, he laughed and said, "You came all the way from the city to this small town. took care of Seed day and night, and all you got is this little truck, huh? What an ironic end. Now the company is mine, and you're left with just this mini truck as your inheritance. It's like a comedy." As he left the room with a smirk, I felt empty inside. Holding the mini truck keys tightly, the cold metal made me face the harsh reality. But my family tried to cheer me up. "Keep your head up." Sean had his reasons. He didn't mean to upset you. That truck was something Dad always loved. It was his favorite vehicle. He surely cared about you. Despite their kind words, I was too hurt to respond. I knew that what you inherit doesn't measure a father's love, but the fact that Kyle, who seemed to be waiting for my father to die, got almost everything, was deeply insulting. It wasn't about the money, it was the pain of seeing my father's hard work go to such a man. I felt powerless to change the situation. Clutching the truck key, I decided to take care of the mini truck, the only thing my father left me. It seemed to hold a deeper meaning. I hoped that cleaning the truck might help me sort out my feelings. I carefully washed the truck with a hose and then sat in the driver's seat, where my father used to sit. Starting the engine, I noticed something unusual on the navigation system. It was displaying a single thick blue route instead of just showing my location. That's odd. Why is there a destination set on the navigation system? I wondered. This usually only happens when a specific route is being followed. When I checked the destination on the screen, it showed only coordinates, not a specific place. It would take about an hour's drive. Wanting to go for a drive in the mini truck, I didn't think too much about it, put the truck in first gear, and left the house. An hour later, during a pleasant drive, I arrived at what seemed like a home. It was a surprise. In front of me was a small, modest house, quite different from the larger homes in my hometown. It felt warm and inviting. The area was quiet, and I couldn't see or hear anyone else around. I got out of the truck and stood in front of the house, feeling a bit confused. There were no signs to indicate what this place was, but it seemed the navigation system had brought me here for a reason. With some hesitation, I rang the doorbell. As the door slowly opened, the person I saw was the last one I expected, my mom. "I've been waiting, Jack." "Come in, dear," she said. "Why are you here, Mom? And how come this place was set in Dad's navigation system?" I asked. "I will explain everything, but first, come inside and relax," she replied. Following her inside, I found the interior simple yet cozy, with just the essentials. My mom made some tea and started to explain in a calm voice. "Actually, this was your father's secret hideout." A hideout? I was surprised. I've never heard about Dad having a place like this. She explained, "This place is our secret spot. We came here when we needed our own space or when we wanted some peace and quiet. If we ever had a small argument, our rule was to come here to cool off. You didn't know about it, did you?" I was stunned and deep in thought. I had no idea such a family rule existed. She continued, "And this is something your father wanted you to have." Saying this, she handed me a brown envelope. It was slightly bulging, as if something important was packed inside. I decided to read the letter addressed to me. "Jack, I have caused you a lot of trouble and made you endure unbearable hardships over the years. I am truly sorry from the bottom of my heart." The letter was filled with my father's reflections on his past mistakes and his deep gratitude towards me. He wrote, "Your mother often tells me that it was your choice to leave home, and a son has the right to choose his own path in life. We are both stubborn, but when you came back after I fell ill, it was a wonderful surprise for me, although I couldn't express it well, because I'm not good at showing my feelings. I am deeply grateful to you for supporting and taking care of the family." This was the first time I heard such heartfelt words from my father, and it made me very emotional. The letter also mentioned Kyle. To tell the truth, my distrust towards Kyle grew over time. He's good with words and makes people feel comfortable, but I could see his true nature. I suspected his sneaky behavior around the house was his way of trying to claim ownership. I was too tired from work and taking care of you all to notice his cunning actions. But now, knowing Kyle as I do, I believe these suspicions were correct. The letter continued, I have no intention of giving the company to you, but if something unexpected happens, I have left a significant amount of money with your mother. This is to ensure that you and Lauren will not be in need. Please accept it. After finishing the letter, I looked up at my mother. She said nothing but looked at the brown envelope. I hesitantly reached for it and checked its contents, confirming everything was in my mother's name. She began to speak firmly. If I transfer the accounts to you and Lauren's names, it would be considered a gift under tax laws. If it's mentioned in the will, Kyle might try to take it. Your father gave this money to me secretly while he was still alive to avoid Kyle's interference. Now, I want to give it to you and Lauren as a living gift. She explained this to me, but I was still trying to understand the full impact. The amount written in the account book she showed me was huge, unlike anything I could have imagined. I had never seen so much money before. It meant a lot to me that my dad had left this for me, not because of the amount, but because it showed he really cared about me, not just Kyle, who was seen as his successor. This touched me deeply. We didn't often share deep emotional words, but I knew he always cared deeply for us. I want everything I entrusted to your mother to be passed on to you as a thank you for all the gifts you've given me, and for that, I am truly grateful, he wrote. Before I knew it, tears were streaming down my face. I couldn't hold back my emotions. For a long time, I felt that my father never really understood me, but I was completely wrong. He always understood and valued me. That's probably why he trusted me with that old mini truck, knowing I would value it and use it well. Mom, I really wish I could have done more for Dad, I said, feeling deep regret. But my mother comforted me with a gentle smile. She seemed to understand the regret I felt, saying, It's natural to think you could have done more when mourning a parent. But you brought your father great joy and gave him so much love. You were his greatest pride. Hearing her words made me cry again. They also inspired me to make a firm decision. I wouldn't let the company my father built fall into the hands of someone like Kyle, who had wished for his death. I had decided to quietly resist and make a careful plan without letting Kyle know I had acquired a significant fortune. The first step was to contact the corporate executives my father had trusted to build a foundation for their support. They agreed to help, supporting my desire to carry on my father's legacy. Their reactions made it clear that my father had never spoken poorly of me. Meanwhile, my mother and sister acted soothingly during the will reading, keeping Kyle's attention off me. They continued to act the same way in front of Kyle, which made him think he had succeeded and look down on me with arrogance. Hey, do you, abandoned by your father and left a poor man, still intend to stay in this house? He taunted. I'm the new president now. Admit your defeat and go back home. Kyle would say these words dismissively, waving his hand as if he was shooing away a small fly. Since becoming CEO, Kyle's arrogant attitude created a tense atmosphere in the company. Despite his high position, he ignored his duties and became rude to his staff. This caused a lot of problems and many skilled employees left unhappy with his leadership. Kyle didn't question his approach and remained overly confident. Those who can't grasp my superior vision might as well quit immediately, he would say in public, making decisions without listening to anyone else. As problems in the company increased, Kyle enjoyed spending money and living lavishly, while his passion for the business seemed to disappear. When I first met him, he seemed like a great person. He was skilled and even my dad liked him. How had he changed so much? She cried every night, hiding her tears from the children. I couldn't just watch the company fall apart. I was quietly planning my next move. The day came when I acted. I left home early and waited at the office for Kyle. When he walked into the president's office, he was shocked to see me sitting there. What the hell are you doing? Why are you sitting there? Get this person out of here, he demanded. The one who should be leaving is you, I replied calmly. What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? Kyle looked at me as if I was an annoying insect. Using the assets our father left us, I had bought the majority of the company's shares. An extraordinary general meeting of shareholders was held, and you were officially removed as president. Kyle, I'm sorry to say, but you are no longer the president of this company. Wait just a minute, he stammered, confused and repeating words that made no sense. Don't you understand? I now control 2/3 of this company's shares. You thought the inheritance was just an old mini truck, but that truck turned into money in an unexpected way. Kyle tried to dig into details about the hideaway, but I avoided his questions and changed the subject, which only made him more upset. The game is over. Leave this place immediately, I told him calmly and handed him several documents. As Kyle looked through them, his face went white. What is this? He asked. These are the minutes from the extraordinary general meeting of shareholders, and this other document is your dismissal notice, I explained. Kyle became very angry, crumpled the papers in his hands, and shouted, You think this will hold up? I'll take legal action. Go ahead with legal action. We have good reasons for our actions, I responded calmly. What reasons? You've just been after the old man's wealth and this company from the start. It's nothing but jealousy, Kyle accused. Let me ask you directly, Kyle. Have you been using company assets for personal use and signing leasing contracts for your own benefit? I asked. What if I have? What's it to you? Kyle replied, his face turning pale with shock. How did you know about that? He stammered as I listed his misconduct, like taking home computers and other appliances meant for company use. There's more. Computers and TVs that should be at the office are at your house, being used for personal things. Isn't that enough reason to act? I pressed on. Struggling to respond, Kyle frantically tried to defend himself. Why? How do you know about that? He asked, his lips trembling. I kept my gaze fixed on him and continued, You should have been more aware of your responsibilities. Did you become complacent when you thought you controlled everything? I had been gathering information about Kyle's actions from the company's executives. After our father passed away, Kyle became more arrogant. He used to at least pretend to respect others, but as president, he began to shift his work onto others and even fell asleep in his office. This attitude caused many loyal employees who respected my father to leave, frustrated by his behavior. Kyle, upset by the situation, doubted my ability to manage, emphasizing that it was impossible for me to fulfill the role of a manager. I had never worked a day in this company. Think about it, how can someone with no experience in running a company become president? It's impossible to trust management to someone like you, Kyle argued. You're absolutely right, I agreed. I have no intention of becoming the president of this company. My sitting in this chair is just a symbolic message to you. In fact, a new president has already been elected by a different board of directors and is already carrying out their duties. Kyle was stunned. He stood there with his mouth open and his eyes wide, shocked by the turn of events. He had been sure that I was after the presidency and had schemed to replace him. As I've said many times, I'm not after the president's position. My only goal is to honor my father and protect the company he spent his life building, I explained. Who would believe such fancy talk? Kyle retorted. He thought I only cared about the wealth and status that came from our father, not his true worth. After my reply, Kyle trembled with anger for a moment, but then composed himself. Do you think this is over and you can just enjoy it? He scoffed and then stormed out of the president's office. That night, something unexpected happened. Lauren threw divorce papers at Kyle, ending their marriage. This was a result of his misconduct at the company and his eventual firing. The new president was chosen from among the directors who respected my father and were determined to protect what he built. I felt the company should be led by someone who would continue my father's legacy, a sentiment my mother and sister supported. As I coordinated Kyle's dismissal with the lawyers, Lauren was preparing for the divorce. On the day she mentioned divorce, her hurt voice filled the house with a heavy atmosphere. "Why do you turn away from me now? Is it because I've lost the title of president and you've lost interest in me?" Kyle asked. Maintaining her calm but firm, Lauren replied, "There's no point in talking about betrayal. You were the one who betrayed our relationship from the start. Your love was not for me, but for the title of the president's daughter. You neglected our home, didn't help raise our children, showed no respect to our sick father, and in the end, you tried to take everything from our father for yourself. Now it's time for you to face the consequences." Kyle had no response to Lauren's words. She had endured a lot, worrying about her children's futures and the fate of the company. But thankfully, the inheritance from our father gave her a solid financial base to raise her children after the divorce. We plan to live a peaceful life away from conflict with our mother and sister. Our only concern was the possibility of retaliation from Kyle, but he was now out of funds. He had lost a lot of money to an investment scam and was even in debt. This scam involved a man pretending to be from a brokerage firm who was actually a fraudster. Kyle, swayed by convincing words, lost a significant amount. This situation shows how people can exploit those who suddenly have a lot of money. Now, Kyle was suffering the financial consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, I spent fulfilling days taking care of my mother. I enjoyed a peaceful, comfortable life, continuing my work at the tutoring school. My mother and I also took great joy in caring for my nephew Peter, who was very fond of us. His presence added happiness to our daily lives. "When I grow up, I'm going to be a president like Grandpa," Peter declared, his words filled with the innocence of childhood dreams. This brought smiles to our faces and even made my mother tear up with emotion. Lauren and I exchanged knowing looks, our smiles reflecting warmth and understanding. "You might say that now, but I wouldn't be surprised if you want to become a teacher when you're in college." I teased him gently, reflecting on similar past statements which made everyone laugh. "But I'm not very good at studying, so maybe I won't make a good teacher," he said seriously, furrowing his brow. His earnestness made this even more endearing and prompted more laughter, this time filled with affection. In that moment, filled with an overwhelming sense of happiness, we realized we were truly living in the present, enjoying our family unity and ready to face whatever the future might bring.